going back to the very beginnings.
This was really, the place to be.
By gunsmith John Dowd in Goshen, Connecticut. So he died in March, and he was going to be buried, and they're looking.
Hey, good morning and welcome to Timestamp. I'm Sean Harrington. I'm the curator for the Manchester Historical Society, and school is in session. Actually, the Manchester Elementary School is right through those trees. You can't see it, but we thought this would be a good time to revisit the one-room school. Actually, well, they were actually multi-room, but the neighborhood schoolhouses of Manchester. And we're starting with the center schoolhouse, or it was called also the Factory Point Schoolhouse because it was right here in Manchester Center. We're standing in the parking lot of the Zion Church, and the schoolhouse that we're going to talk about, the original schoolhouse was built in 1829, and then they decided they needed a new schoolhouse. So in 1869 they sold it to Warren Adams, who was the father of Harry Adams, the namesake of Adams Park, which is just over here to my right. And Warren picked it up and moved it around the corner, and it served as Adams Hall for a number of years, and then it was picked up again and moved to the top of Center Hill, where it now serves as M&M Plumbing. And so they built a new schoolhouse with a beautiful belfry, and it served the children of Manchester Center for up until 1950, when the Manchester Elementary School opened and all the neighborhood schoolhouses closed down. And at that point it was sold to the Thompson family, who owned Manchester Molding and Manchester Wood, and they used it for storage. For a little while they actually had it painted pink, but in 1967 the Zion Church bought it. They tore it down, and one neat little kind of factoid about that is that when I saw a picture in Jubilate, which is a book about the Zion Church history, I saw the cupola, or the belfry, was kind of sitting off to the side, and it turned out that Brad West bought the cupola and he hauled it up to his house on Mount Aeolus Lane, and it's still sitting in the front yard. But that was really kind of the end of it. So they tore it down and turned it into a parking lot. I guess maybe we could play a little Joni Mitchell, pave paradise and put up a parking lot. But one thing's nice, I'm here with the GNAT news director, Andrew McKeever, and a student. Believe it or not, there are still students among us who actually went to school at that center schoolhouse before it closed in 1950. Mike Powers, who serves as one of the directors of the Manchester Historical Society, been an enormous support to me personally, and I'm delighted that they both can be here. So we're going to go over and have a little chat with them. All right, Andrew, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Sean.
Michael, always.
Hey, Sean.
So Andrew has been doing a little bit of a deep dive on what actually happened in the schoolhouses. I only can tell you about the building. What happened inside, whole nother story. So Andrew, you're the news guy. So what are your questions? You have questions.
Right. Well, Mike, great to have you here.
Thanks for asking
until
me.
we started doing this little project, I didn't realize that you were one of the veterans of the old schools before MEMS, or MES, I guess it was called.
It's called old age, Andrew.
Oh yeah, well, tell me about it. But anyway, I just wondered if you could tell us, what was going to school like when it was the center school here, instead of a parking lot. But how many kids were in a class?
Well, I lived on Bonnet Street, where the Shaw Insurance Agency and now the Richards Group are headquartered. So I walked to school. I'm sure I probably walked right up over the school street and around and came over here. And you brought a bag lunch with you. There was no facilities to eat here. And the front yard was big, mainly gravel, and the front door steps, there was 3 or 4 steps up. And you arrived at the school in the morning, and you waited for them to let you in. I was on the first floor on the right side. That was a large room with 2 grades in it, first and second grade. And on the other side of the hall when you went in there was a staircase going to the second floor, and then there was another classroom which 3rd and 4th grade were in. The restrooms, so to speak, pretty primitive, were down in the basement. As I recall, it was one of those pull the chain and the water came from a little box up above. I mean, it was sort of like being in a cow barn is all I could think of. And then around to the side between the building and Zion Church and this marble wall that's out here, it's been here for years, you walked around the back and there was the playground, which consisted of 2 metal swings sets with maybe, I think, 2 swings in each set. And all the kids, that's all we had. And then there was an embankment that went down into a field and back, which became the site of the new elementary school. And so recess, when the whole school would be out, you'd be out there jammed into the backyard fighting to get onto a swing, which when you're in 1st and 2nd grade you never got, because the older kids got it all. And there'd be a teacher out there supervising. And as I recall, the supervisor many days was Miss Miles, Effie Miles, who was a 6th grade teacher, and 5th and 6th probably, she had 2 grades. And she was my 6th grade teacher when I went over to the elementary school, and she'd been my mother's 6th grade teacher when she went to this school. Wow. Miss Miles she wore pince-nez, and she was a little tiny gal who lived around up the street where the Palmer House is now. And anyways, one of my greatest memories was on a very snowy, cold day being out there, and we used to slide down that back hill. It was solid ice, and somehow Miss Miles lost her balance and she slid. This little tiny rotund woman slid down the bank. But her glasses didn't come off, as I recall, and that was all good, and she somehow made it back up the bank. Of course, everybody was laughing, which we shouldn't have done. That's my outdoor memory. There were frequently bullying type activities in those days. Certain kids were picked on. And I remember in one complete respect, the Whitman family lived up the street next to what the eye care place is in the 2-family house. And Mrs. Whitman got so tired of her son Bobby being picked on that one day she marched into the playground and grabbed somebody that had been picking on him and shook him. But that's the way things got, you know, we were all quite, amused by this. And then the classes, if you're interested, I can tell you what that was like. My teacher was Florence Kelton, and her family owned the Hapgood store over in Peru, Art Kelton's father and mother. And Miss Kelton was a maiden lady, and she taught 1st and 2nd grade. So the first year I went in and I was on the right side of a row of desks with probably 20, 22, 23 kids in it. And you went the year, and then the next year you crossed the aisle and you sat in the seats on the other side, and the same teacher came out. And school life went on with those 2 years that I was in this school, in which time they were building the new elementary school to consolidate the school districts. We had some outside stimulation. There was a music teacher that came once a week named Jenny Griffith, who was Mike Norath's grandmother. She lived on Cottage Street, and she was a lovely lady, physically and mentally. I mean, she's just a great lady. But she would lead us in singing, but of course there was no piano or anything. But the big deal was she brought little chimes, little triangles, and if you were really good, you got to go ding, ding. And I can remember there was great competition for that. And I don't remember much about it. I brought my report cards, which I've given to Andrew, but he asked my permission to disclose that I was a solid B student, with the exception of writing, which I was a C student and still am a D student now in writing. But at least we learned how to write. Nowadays, kids only print, as you know, so that's quite different.
Or they
don't do either. But when we send written letters to our grandchildren, this school taught me that, but they weren't taught, and they can barely read them. So it's interesting how things have evolved. It was an experience where you were young. I had been in kindergarten, which was at the Burton Gym, the old gym, taught by a woman named Beanie Graham, who was a famous gal. They ran the Dellwood flower shops and greenhouses, and he was the superintendent of the Dellwood Cemetery. She was a very flamboyant woman. And then we moved from there to the above the kitchen in Zion Parish, And the highlight is she had a sandbox inside, a huge sandbox. We could play in the sand all year. And she also had a little white mouse that she would take out, and it would crawl up this side of her arm, behind her back, and then crawl down the other side of her arm. And we would be sitting there, and then of course we graduated from there to come down here. We were really ready for a different experience. And punishment in the kindergarten was when you were obstreperous, you were sat at a table with slats in it, with holes in between them, you know, and then you were made to write on it. And of course your pencil went through the paper. That was a form of punishment that we received. But she prepared us beautifully. We sang and did all that sort of stuff so that when we got here, we were pretty well disciplined. I don't remember any particular discipline problems at the school. Mr. Bigelow was the superintendent, and he was also known as Mr. Big Toe. And he lived on Bonnet Street. I shoveled his walk one winter and spent 2 hours for him, and he gave me 25 cents.
Well, that was big money back
And
then.
oh sure, I guess I looked so forlorn, Mr. Bigelow said, I suppose that isn't enough, and gave me another dime.
Wow. All right. So, just real quick, what was it like then transitioning from here over to the...
Well,
This
we
school.
watched it being built. And so during the summer, because I lived on Bonnet Street, that became our playground.
Oh, okay.
And at night, we would climb up and get on the scaffolding on the exterior of the school and run through the area. It was quite exciting. And then finally, you know, it opened, and we went to the new school, which everybody had their own individual teacher and classroom, bringing together the school from East Manchester Road across from the post office, and the village school, which is still now the Manchester Music Festival place. Those were the three schools existing. I think all the other little schools by that time had closed. Certainly the one up on that my father went to had closed up on Route 7, and the one down in Peggy Beckwith's estate hadn't been in operation for years. The one on the West Road, I think, had been closed, which is now a private residence. You know, there were 3 or 4. There was one in Barnumville, which is a private residence. These were all single family, but they had all closed by that time, I think, and consolidated into 3. So going over there was, you know, this modern building, you know, cement block and tile and asbestos. And
A whole different world.
And your own teacher without having to share. And there was a music teacher in the school, Mrs. Griffith, who became the music teacher. We had an auditorium. We could put on shows and plays, and yeah, we grew. And third grade teacher I had over there was Mildred O'Neill, who had been teaching at the School for the Deaf over in Brattleboro, which her parents were both deaf mutes, and so she had been trained in that. But what she hadn't been trained in is teaching third grade people that were normal as far as hearing and speech went. And I must say, she's dead now, I can say this, all her relatives are gone. Probably the worst experience of my entire educational life was a wasted year. She was a kind, wonderful lady, but not a very forthgoing teacher. But then I graduated to 4th grade with a woman named Mrs. Lawler, and she was very different. She was
Life got
very
better,
strict.
huh? Okay.
Yes.
Well, all right. We'll leave it there for today. We're going to be going over to several of the other schools, some of the ones that Mike just mentioned, and kind of check those out and see what they're like. Anyway, we'll be in touch.
Let me
and,
mention
see
one
you
more
soon.
thing here. Is
Okay.
that my experience in the school, you had to go to school till you were 16. And I, in 3rd grade, had a 16-year-old girl in my class who just sat at a desk all year long, and this is that 3rd grade I told you about, never uttered a word, just sat. Looked a little bit like Whistler's mother. She was sort of hunched and long hair. I won't bother to tell you her name, but that's what school was like. We had these older kids that were required to be in school, but they didn't matriculate. They just sat their time out. So it was a very different configuration on how they took care of children that had special needs in particular.
Well, Sean, what do you think?
We could do this for many, many hours.
Wow.
That's for sure. Andrew, thank you. And Mike, So Mike, Mike did go on to graduate from Burton in 1960, and because he didn't have enough of school, he has served as a trustee of Burton for how many years now?
I think 12, and I was chair of the Manchester School Board for 8.
So he's done his time.
I have.
Those third grade teachers didn't, mess you up too
No,
much.
I wanted to be sure they didn't come back.
Well, Andrew, thank you. This was a lot of fun. We're going to keep going, and we're going to go take a look at some of the other neighborhood schoolhouses, and I'm sure there's going to be a list of things for us to cover in the coming
Yeah,
months
I
and
mean,
year.
you've still got. Oh, there was a school up in back of the track 4 too. It's a house now.
East Manchester.
So
Yeah.
all these little buildings were maintained. All of them turned into homes.
Yeah.
Then the one on West Road looks like a school. The one over here in Barnum is sort of like a school.
Yeah,
And
still got the belfry.
The one up in East Manchester doesn't. But then I go by Brad West Belfry every year.
Yeah, and
every
your dad's
day.
school is gone.
Yeah,
Hollister
the
school
Hollister
is gone.
School they took down. Yeah, that was on the Bryant farm,
Yeah.
which was my family.
Small world things, small town. Thanks a lot.
It's
we'll
the
see you again
best.
soon. And as I mentioned, being in the village, we were at, guess what? The Village Schoolhouse.
Why not? Just off of Dillingham Avenue, where the Manchester Music Festival has its headquarters now.
Do you know Dillingham Avenue, where the name comes from?
I was going to ask you that because that name rings a bell somehow to me.
He was, I believe he was the governor, or maybe the
Right.
senator. He was either the governor or I think he was the governor of Vermont in around 1900 when they opened up these roads.
Right.
Anyway, sorry,
Right.
rabbit hole.
Anyway.
Somebody will email and say, no, he wasn't the governor.
They better. So anyway, tell us about the school.
So the story of this schoolhouse actually begins on Main Street. On Main Street, next to the courthouse, it went the courthouse, the schoolhouse, and the Congregational Church. The original Congregational Church, it was built in 1829. Well, in 1869, Franklin Orvis, who was the proprietor of the Equinox House, wanted to open up the view to the Green Mountains for his summer visitors who were sitting out on the piazzas in their rocking chairs. So they wanted to build a new Congregational Church. So he wrote a letter to Sergeant Hawley about some of the land his family owned, and wouldn't it be nice to rebuild the church a little bit farther north, and then if that all works out, I'll pay to have the schoolhouse moved to a piece of land that I own on West Road. So they moved the schoolhouse back, and they set it down on the foundation, put an addition on, and what we see is what we got. And it served as the schoolhouse for the village until 1950 when they opened up Manchester Elementary School, and it became a private residence for a number of years, and then it was, I think, 1984-ish when the Manchester Music Festival purchased it, and it's been the festival house ever since.
So I'm intrigued by that belfry up there. There must have been a bell up there at one point.
There
right?
was, and you can't see it right now, but I actually went up in there, and there is no bell, and I'm not really sure where it went. So that would maybe another segment when we go around and visit the school bells of Manchester, or the bells of Manchester, because there's a lot of very interesting stories about the bells around here. But that one, not sure where it is.
So kindergarten through 6th grade then?
8th.
Through 8th grade,
Yep.
okay. And most of the students would have come from the immediate neighborhood here in the village?
They would have come from the immediate neighborhood. I mean, there were exceptions. There used to be the Purdy School District, which was south, kind of down by where Equinox Valley Nursery is on Route 7. When that closed, it kind of consolidated up here. I know one instance, Lorraine Perry Harrington, who actually lived down on Richville Road, opted to come to the village school to go to school because she didn't want to go to the Merriman School in the Depot because her Aunt Albina was a teacher there. So she hoofed it up Union Street every day
That makes
to go to
sense.
school.
I would have done that, for sure. So this wouldn't have been like the old kind of one-room schoolhouse. Obviously, this is a fairly large village, so there must have been rooms for each grade level. To be
Yeah,
done?
they had. I think they segmented, multiple grades per. They had the little kids, then the middle kids, then the older kids who were getting ready to go to Burton.
And I imagine this must have been the playground out here in the front, eh?
Yeah, and some of the older pictures you could see the playgrounds were out, over on the south side or on the north side in the back. And of course, when this was a schoolhouse, I mean, right now we're kind of surrounded by foliage and trees, and none of that was here. This was wide open. They used to have a walkway that went from the front steps all the way down to West Road.
So how many little schools were there like this in back in the days before Manchester Elementary School? No, Manchester Elementary Middle School was constructed in the early 1950s. 4, 5, 6 altogether?
Well, it depends on which area you're speaking of. I mean, they had districts. I think there were 16 districts labeled on the Beers map from 1869. I think it was 16. It was 16 or 12. 16 school districts, and each one had their own schoolhouse. And so when I say schoolhouse, it could have been somebody's home. You know, like the village. So when the village schoolhouse was opened, it was opened in the 1820s. But before that, there were a number of places where schools were located. So it wasn't always just a specific building for schoolhouses. But by 1950, I think there were only 4 or 5 of them open. Three that I definitely know were open, and a couple had closed just before, you know, just in the years leading up to 1950, knowing that the consolidation was coming. You know, a lot of times they had the schoolhouses because nobody got there. You know, there was before mass transportation and cars. You know, it wasn't easy to get to school, so you would have to walk to school. So it had to be within a fairly
reasonable distance.
Oh, you know, walking to school both ways uphill through 3 feet of snow was a reality.
Right.
You know, for some
I
of the
was
kids.
just wondering, how did kids get to school in the wintertime if there was no school buses or anything like that?
And if you think about it, the bells. I mean, before there was, you know, noise of transportation and all the things that go on in our modern life, and that, you know, there were no trees to absorb the sound. You know, when a school bell rang, you could hear it, you know, resonating through, you know, that immediate area. Now if they ring a bell, you know, you can only hear it for maybe a couple hundred yards.
It's really fascinating to think about how different that experience was for kids back in those days compared to today.
Yeah.
I mean, a really different world altogether. But, well, we have more to explore, and we'll have a few more episodes of some of the other buildings that are still here, no longer used as schools, but...
Oh, actually, that reminds me. So if you look up other timestamps, we actually have an oral history project with Mildred Orton, who was actually a student here at the village school, and she lived down on the Wilcox farm. Her maiden name was Mildred Wilcox, and she talks about what it was like getting to and from school, what it was like going here, and she also went to Burton after she graduated 8th grade, which a lot of kids, this was it. You know, they didn't go to then would have been considered a secondary or preparatory school. You know, it was only if you had the means to pay for it, because a lot of high schools were, you know,
And
were
I
private.
guess back in those days, for a lot of kids, after 8th grade, it was time to get a job and help support the
Absolutely.
family and all that.
Yeah, that's what happened with you back then, right?
Right,
'Cause when
right,
you're
yeah.
19th century. No, I'm just kidding.
It feels like it sometimes. Anyway, well, I guess we'll leave it there for today, Sean, but hope everyone hangs around and catches the next episodes that will be coming up as we visit some of the other old schools here in town.